In an unknown corner of the galaxy, the blue planet Aruvia, covered in golden dust, is known as the home of the Arkiys race, a civilization composed solely of women. These tall, elegant, blue-skinned beings are renowned for their intelligence, strength, and warrior spirit. However, what truly sets them apart is their unique method of reproduction. When an Arkiys woman mates with a man, his fate is sealed once the cycle is complete. According to their sacred laws, men have no place on Arkiys soil. At the head of this powerful society stands Queen Zephira. With her silvery white hair and piercing gaze, she is both an inspiration and a source of fear for her people. Since birth, she has sworn to uphold the traditions of the Arkiys race, enforcing the laws that shape the future of her kind. She is the ultimate embodiment of what an Arkiys should be: strong, ruthless, and unimaginably beautiful. On a light platform near Aruvia's surface, a man knelt in despair, pleading for mercy. His name was Darren. His arrival here had been set in motion just a few nights ago, when he succumbed to the irresistible allure of an Arkiys woman. Alia had chosen him, sealing his fate. Alia stood before him, her expression devoid of mercy or regret. In her hand, she held the Xerka ring, one of the sacred artifacts of the Arkiys people. This ring served as a final reminder to men before their last moments arrived. Darren's voice trembled. "Please, I love you. Don't do this to me." Alia shook her head. "This is our way. You knew what you were getting into." The Arkiys women never questioned their laws. Their purpose was to maintain a strong lineage, and men were merely temporary vessels. The final step of the ritual required Queen Zephira's approval, and she sat on her dazzling throne at the edge of the platform, overseeing the ceremony. Zephira rose gracefully from her seat. "It is time," she declared. "Those who question our ancient laws will not go unpunished." Alia knelt before Darren, placing her hand on his cheek as she gazed at him one last time. Then, without hesitation, she activated the light platform's controls. The hidden crystals beneath the surface illuminated, and within seconds, Darren's body dissolved into pure energy, scattering into the depths of space. The entire process occurred in complete silence. Alia turned away and rejoined her people. Darren's existence was erased from Arkiys history. Zephira returned to her throne. "Prepare for the next man," she commanded, gazing up at the sky. Thus, the unchanging destiny of the Arkiys continued. On the planet Aruvia, the most grand and significant festival of the Arkiys people, known as the Ancient Selection Night, was approaching. This festival was held only once every 100 years, and only once for an Arkiys queen. This time, it was for Zephira. The stars adorning the celestial dome were fused with the sacred stones of the Arkiys, forming a massive energy dome at the planet's center. This energy was a symbol of the Arkiys women's devotion to their traditions, an ancient ritual passed down for generations. The festival grounds, known as the Aurora Temple, were a vast plaza covered in shimmering obsidian stones. At the heart of this sacred space, 10 men would stand. Zephira stood in a chamber high within her magnificent palace, specially prepared for the occasion. From the outside, she appeared as she always did: calm, fearsome, and commanding. Yet deep inside, she felt something unfamiliar: excitement. Her entire life, she had been raised to be a strong, fearless, and merciless queen. But now, for the first time, she had to make a choice. The man she chose would spend only one night with her, and even this thought unsettled her. An Arkiys queen did not fear, but Zephira could feel her heart beating faster. The palace attendants arrived to prepare her for the ceremony. She was dressed in a pure white gown that flowed down to her knees. A golden embroidered cape draped from her shoulders. Her hair was braided with golden threads and dusted with pearls. She had been adorned in the most magnificent way to showcase her regal presence, but no one knew the turmoil within her. "My queen, are you ready for the festival?" her most loyal advisor, Myra, asked. Zephira gazed at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were as piercing and cold as ever, yet something inside her trembled. Was she ready? Of course. "Let's begin," she said, ensuring not a single hint of hesitation betrayed her voice. But she knew that tonight, she was about to take the greatest step of her life. As she arrived at the festival grounds, the 10 men stood before her, kneeling in submission. Each one had been selected from different planets, chosen for their most exceptional genetic traits, the perfect candidates for the Arkiys lineage. Yet deep inside, Zephira still felt uneasy. Because tonight, something would happen, something that could change not just her fate, but the fate of all Arkiys traditions. Zephira gracefully sat upon her obsidian-adorned throne. Around her, thousands of Arkiys women stood in complete silence, their gazes fixed on their queen, awaiting her decision. But Zephira's attention had shifted to one of the 10 men kneeling before her. This man was different from the others. His short hair, well-shaped beard, and a strong yet unexaggerated physique set him apart. But more importantly, his eyes did not show fear. Unlike the other men, his gaze held curiosity and defiance rather than submission. Zephira locked eyes with him and spoke in her cold yet captivating voice. "What is your name?" The man lifted his head slightly and responded, "Kael." Zephira tested the name in her mind. Kael. A strong name, short, but powerful. Kael, she repeated softly. Then, after a brief pause, she continued her questioning. "Which planet are you from?" Kael's voice remained steady as he answered. "Zypher, the land of warriors." Zephira's eyebrows lifted slightly. Zypher. A planet known for its harsh climate, deadly predators, and battle-hardened people. It was one of the best places to produce strong offspring for the Arkiys bloodline. However, Zyphorian men were known not to be obedient, and that could be a problem. Zephira leaned in slightly, studying him more closely. "Are you not afraid, Kael?" Kael smirked, but it wasn't an arrogant smile. It carried something else, a hidden challenge. "Fear," he echoed, tilting his head slightly. "That depends on what you expect me to do." A ripple of movement spread through the crowd. The Arkiys women exchanged surprised glances. No man had ever spoken with such boldness. Most, even if chosen, accepted their fate in fearful silence. But Kael. He was different. Zephira felt the excitement within her grow stronger. "You have caught my attention, Kael." She allowed a slight smile to grace her lips. "But do you understand what it means to be here?" Kael never broke eye contact. "I do." For a brief moment, Zephira's heart quickened. Whether this man would truly be chosen depended on her final decision. Zephira forced herself to tear her gaze away from Kael's face, but it was harder than she expected. A sense of unease stirred within her. Why was she focusing only on him? There were still 9 other candidates before her. Each had been selected in strict accordance with the sacred laws of the Arkiys people. They possessed strong genetics, healthy bodies, and obedient temperaments, the perfect matches for an Arkiys queen. But Kael, he was different. Zephira took a deep breath, regaining her composure. A strong queen did not fixate on a single man. Slowly, she turned to the other candidates. "You?" She looked at a tall, muscular man kneeling to her right. "What is your name?" The man immediately bowed his head. "Lyros, my queen." Zephira nodded with forced indifference. "Which planet are you from, Lyros?" "Dravian, known for its mighty hunters." Zephira heard the words, but they felt meaningless. Her mind was still trapped in Kael's gaze, in his unwavering confidence. The other men felt like empty shells. She spoke to them, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him. She moved to the next candidate. "Your name?" "Ryan, my queen." "Where are you from, Titanus?" One by one, each man gave their answer, but none of them captured her interest. Without meaning to, Zephira glanced sideways at Kael. And Kael was looking at her silently, and flinching, challenging. For a brief moment, it felt as if everyone else had disappeared. Zephira straightened her posture, trying to suppress the turmoil within her. But for the first time, a question echoed in her mind. What is this man doing to me? And perhaps even more importantly, am I really going to choose him? Zephira regained her composure. A queen did not act on emotions, but on logic. Kael may have caught her attention, may have ignited something within her with his defiant gaze, but that wasn't enough. Being different was not the same as being strong. An Arkiys queen had to choose the strongest. Weakness had no place beside the throne. Zephira's gaze swept over the candidates once more. Lyros was the most physically powerful among them. A warrior from Dravian, raised in the harsh wilderness, built like a beast, hardened by the elements. And like Kael, he had already proven himself in battle. Slowly, Zephira rose from her throne. Silence filled the square. Everyone could feel that their queen had made a decision, but it was not a simple one. Letting her eyes shift between Kael and Lyros, she spoke in a voice that echoed across the gathering. "An Arkiys Queen chooses the strongest. Tonight, only one of you will become my mate, but only the one who survives." The entire plaza fell into a hushed silence. The men lifted their heads, some in shock, others in fear. "Kael and Lyros, you will fight in a duel to the death. The one who lives will be mine." A moment of stillness stretched over the arena. A fight for survival. Lyros rose to his feet immediately. His powerful muscles tensed, and a smug smile crossed his face. "This must be a joke," he scoffed, his voice dripping with mockery. "This man, my opponent." Kael stood up, never once breaking eye contact with Zephira. Then, he turned to Lyros, stretching his arms casually. "So, you like to talk," he said, smirking. "Let's see if you can fight just as well." Zephira could feel the rising tension between them. This was what she wanted to see: power, courage, the desire for victory. The two warriors were led to the dueling arena, a circular battlefield surrounded by glowing crystal stones, leaving no escape. Both were handed Arkiys ceremonial energy blades, weapons that did not spill blood, but instead absorbed life force upon contact, paralyzing the opponent. However, a fatal strike meant no return. The crowd held their breath. Zephira returned to her throne and gave the signal for the duel to begin. "Fight!" The silence in the arena was suddenly shattered by thunderous battle cries. Lyros lunged forward with terrifying speed. Trained in Dravian's warrior techniques, he was a fighter who could overpower opponents with sheer brute force. Against him, Kael seemed to stand no chance. But Zephira felt something strange inside her. "Kael," she thought, her gaze locked onto him. "I don't want him to lose." "What?" The thought echoed in her mind, and for a brief second, her body froze. She had always chosen the strongest. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. And yet, there she was, holding her breath with every move Kael made. Lyros swung his blade. Kael dodged, barely escaping the strike. Then, with a quick pivot, he found an opening, but he didn't strike. Zephira narrowed her eyes. Kael was studying him. Lyros struck again, this time grazing Kael's shoulder. Sparks flew from the impact on his armor. Zephira shifted in her seat involuntarily. This isn't good. Her heartbeat quickened. She didn't want Kael to lose, but why? Shoving the thought aside, she focused back on the fight. Kael was still watching Lyros's movements carefully. He was waiting, patient, just like a true warrior. And then, it happened. Lyros launched a powerful strike, swinging his blade with all his might. Kael suddenly sidestepped, dodging at the last second. Then, in a flash, he spun around. Zephira held her breath. Kael's energy blade plunged into Lyros's chest. Silence. Lyros's eyes widened, his face flickering between shock and fury. But then, he collapsed onto his knees. The energy from the blade had paralyzed him completely. He had lost. Kael had won. The arena was silent. Kael slowly rose to his feet, planting his blade into the ground before turning his gaze towards Zephira. In that moment, a shiver ran down her spine. This man had won. But that wasn't what she was thinking about. During the fight, I was worried. I was afraid for him. For the first time, Zephira felt uncertain about her own decision. She had wanted the strongest, and Kael had proven himself. But if Kael had lost, she now realized something terrifying: she wouldn't have wanted him to die. And that was a dangerous feeling for an Arkiys queen. A queen could not act on emotions. But after this duel, Kael was no longer just a chosen mate, he was a shadow in her mind, disturbing her balance. And perhaps her biggest challenge was only just beginning. As the duel ended, a deep silence settled over the arena. Lyros's defeat had transformed into pure fear on the faces of the remaining men. They all knew their fate. Kael had survived and earned the right to be the queen's mate. But for the others, Zephira slowly rose from her throne. Her long cape trailed behind her as she moved with cold and unwavering authority. Yet, deep inside, she was still battling her own emotions, struggling with the realization that she hadn't wanted Kael to die. Now, it was time to carry out tradition. Zephira cast one last glance at Kael before turning to the remaining men. According to our ancient laws, she began, her voice echoing across the plaza, the Unchosen have no place on Arkiys soil. The men's faces paled. Some of them shifted nervously, as if contemplating escape, but the Arkiys guards surrounded them, ensuring that no one could run. Zephira continued, "You were given the honor of continuing the Arkiys bloodline, but fate has not chosen you." A massive light platform activated in the center of the arena, a gateway to the depths of space. According to Arkiys traditions, the Unchosen men were not executed but rather cast into the unknown reaches of the galaxy, their fate left to the void. The first man was brought forward, Lyros. He had been a great warrior, but Kael had defeated him. Now, his eyes burned with anger, but also with acceptance. Zephira studied him for a moment. Lyros was strong but not as strong as Kael. "You were an honorable warrior," the queen said, "but your time here is over." Lyros cast her a cold glare before turning to Kael. "You got lucky," he snarled through gritted teeth. "But you know this isn't over, don't you?" Kael said nothing. He just stared back. Finally, the guards dragged Lyros onto the light platform. In an instant, his body transformed into pure energy, and with a blinding flash, he was hurled into the endless void of space. Then, the next man was brought forward. Ryan the Hunter from Titanus. Devor the Engineer from the Red Moon. Zane the Gladiator from the Ice Planet. One by one, they were cast into the abyss. Some screamed in desperation, while others accepted their fate in silence, until, at last, only Kael remained. The ceremony was complete. The festival carried on, the Arkiys people celebrating their queen's choice. But Zephira still felt uneasy. Kael stood silently. He was the victor, but his expression was unreadable. Zephira's thoughts echoed in her mind. I didn't want him to die. The realization unnerved her. An Arkiys queen wasn't supposed to feel this way, but it was too late now. Kael had been chosen, and tonight, Zephira would be alone with him. The plaza was empty now, only Kael remained. The ceremony was over, and the Arkiys people had begun their celebrations. But for Zephira, the most important moment was just beginning. She had chosen Kael, but now she wasn't sure why. Was it tradition, or was it something about him? As Zephira struggled to understand her emotions, she fixed her gaze on Kael. She tried to appear cold and composed. But deep inside, she could feel her own heartbeat. What was this man doing to her? Why hadn't she wanted him to lose? Taking a deep breath, she focused her eyes on Kael. Kael. Her voice was different this time, more thoughtful. Kael looked at her, his expression as calm as ever, yet still carrying that unspoken challenge. Come with me, Zephira's voice was firm, to my palace. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. The Arkiys people had been waiting for these words. But they didn't know what Zephira was feeling inside. This was supposed to be just a ritual, a tradition. But to her, it felt like something much more. Kael gave a slight bow. As you command, my queen, Zephira frowned. His calmness unnerved her even more. Zephira led Kael to the highest tower of her palace, her personal chambers. A vast room, with a grand balcony, where she could watch the sky in absolute solitude. As the doors closed, they were finally alone. Zephira turned to face Kael. He was still composed, but there was something in his eyes, a silent challenge. You proved your strength, Zephira said, crossing her arms. But that doesn't mean you're safe here. Kael gave a slight nod. I know. Silence. For the first time, Zephira felt uneasy. He was challenging her, but without words. She needed to stop this. She needed to take control. But the excitement inside her was overpowering all reason. Tonight, she was alone with him. And that unsettled her more than anything else. Zephira had never felt this before. The Arkiys traditions had always taught her, this is just a ritual, just a necessity. But now, the emotions rising within her were shattering everything she had been taught. When she touched Kael, it was as if lightning surged through her body. He was strong not just physically, but in a way that reached deep inside her and changed something within her. A queen never lost control, but right now, Zephira felt like a leaf caught in the wind. When she closed her eyes, it was as if gravity had abandoned her. Her mind was empty yet filled with 1,000 glowing stars of emotion. She had never felt her own body like this before, as if she had left reality and stepped into another realm. This wasn't just physical, this was something more. A spell that wrapped around her soul. An Arkiys Queen never acted on emotions, but now she could feel nothing else. When Zephira looked at Kael, for the first time, she felt like she was truly seeing someone. Kael was not like the other men she had encountered. He was not just part of tradition. He had shaken her world, and Arkiys Queen never feared. But right now, she was afraid. Afraid of losing herself. Afraid of truly attaching herself to Kael, and worst of all, afraid that his fate was already sealed, just like the others. This night was no longer just a ritual for Zephira, it was a turning point. For the first time, she was afraid of losing someone, and that was her greatest weakness. But right now, she didn't want to think about it. Because tonight, there was only the two of them. And tonight, Zephira felt like everything was perfect. Zephira's inner conflict. The room was silent. Starlight from the depths of the sky streamed through the balcony windows, and a faint breeze brushed against Zephira's skin. But her mind was far away. She could still feel Kael's touch lingering on her body. But her thoughts were in turmoil. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. An Arkiys Queen was forbidden from succumbing to emotions. This was only a ritual, yet why did she still feel the weight in her chest? This night will be forgotten, she told herself, closing her eyes. Everything will go back to how it was. But a voice echoed in her mind, no, it won't. She knew she would never forget those moments. This union had been different, almost like magic. Kael had changed her, and the worst part, she had realized she didn't want to lose him. That was against everything their traditions stood for. Arkiys women did not get attached. Then why did the emptiness inside her keep growing? Kael sat at the edge of the bed, silent. Zephira watched him. He still held the same unwavering confidence, but there was something more thoughtful in his eyes. As if he knew the truth, that nothing would ever be the same again. Zephira couldn't handle the chaos inside her. She stood up, took a deep breath, and turned to Kael. This was just a tradition, she said, her voice firm but carrying an uncertain tremor. A night to be forgotten. Kael turned to her, but his eyes didn't match her words. A moment of silence passed between them. Then, Kael slowly inclined his head. Of course, my queen, he said. And that only deepened Zephira's confusion. Because in Kael's voice, there was acceptance. But also, a silent challenge. She knew she should never become attached. But she didn't want him to leave. That was her greatest weakness. And for the first time, Zephira felt true fear. Because Kael was not just her chosen mate anymore, he had taken hold of her emotions. And if she accepted that, she didn't know what her own traditions would do to her. But she knew one thing for certain, this night would never be forgotten. As Zephira tried to break free from the spell of the night, she felt like she was drowning in the shadow of tradition. Kael's eyes were still on her, as if waiting for something. But she was a queen, she could not surrender to emotions. As the storm within her grew more violent, Kael took a deep breath and spoke. Zephira, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. This night was more than just a tradition for me, and I know it was the same for you. Zephira remained silent, but she couldn't look away from him. Kael took a step closer, his voice carrying a strange sense of peace. You don't have to be chained to this place. You are not just the queen of Arkiys, Zephira. You are someone. You are a woman. You have the right to feel like a human. Zephira's heart pounded. Run away with him. The thought wrapped around her mind like a poisonous vine. But her people, wouldn't this be betrayal? Kael saw her hesitation. If you want, he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. We can leave, together. Leave this planet, this tradition, everything behind. We can be free from the chains that bind us. Zephira struggled to breathe. I can't. But she also couldn't say she didn't want to. Zephira took a step back. Kael's words had shaken her. But she was a queen. She could never abandon her people. No, she finally said, her voice cracked. I am not Kael. I am the leader of the Arkiys. I cannot abandon them. I cannot destroy my people for my own happiness. Maybe it was not fitting for a queen, but the thought that Kael would never touch her again hurt her. She tilted her head slightly, allowing him to come closer. And then, their lips met. For a moment, Zephira forgot everything. Kael's touch was still the same. Still held the same reassurance. But then, she felt a burning sensation on her neck, like fire spreading through her veins. Her eyes widened. Something was wrong. She tried to push Kael away, but her muscles wouldn't respond. Dizziness, darkness, silence. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed. The last thing she saw was Kael's face, but his smile was different now. And in that moment, she understood. Kael was a lie. And Zephira had just suffered the greatest betrayal of her life. As Zephira lost consciousness, Kael caught her delicate body and slowly laid her on the ground. The plan was finally complete. The king of Xerka had wanted the queen of Arkiys. And Kael had never been a warrior. He had always been a hunter. I'm sorry, my queen, he whispered. But my mission was to take you, and I never fail my mission. Kael activated a device on his wrist. The room was suddenly filled with a glowing blue light. And just seconds later, Zephira disappeared from Arkiys' soul along with Kael.